Hello, homebrewed Christianity deacons. This is Trip, and this is the first episode of a new homebrewed Christianity stream. This one is an oak-barreled, you could say, interview from the homebrewed Christianity archives. Many of you were not around 4 years ago, when some really excellent interviews were recorded. And we're going to be re-releasing them here. No intros, none of that other stuff, just a little quick hi from me and hop on into the interview. We'll also try to doctor up the sound. Of course, some of them were recorded in less than ideal conditions using technology that's not that wonderful. But nonetheless, we'll do our best. And this episode was recorded with John Dominic Crossan in a hotel room in Winston-Salem, North Carolina in 2008. He was visiting to talk at the Divinity School where I was attending, Wake Forest University's School of Divinity. And this is him talking about his book, God and Empire. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you come over to homebrewedchristianity.com, catch up with the other podcasts that are going on. I hope you click the Amazon links there. Any link from Amazon there. You can go buy whatever you want, same way you would before, except a little bit of it goes to the Homebrewed Christianity podcast expense account. There you go. And as always, you can click that donate button on PayPal, and you too can sponsor an episode. You got anything to say here, Elgin? What do you want to say?
Brew on.
There you go. You heard it first. He's out.
What was that?
I don't know. I was too busy talking to Big Nose.
I think it was Blessed Are the Cheesemakers.
What's so special about the cheesemakers?
Well, obviously, it's not meant to be taken literally. It refers to any manufacturers of dairy products.
At the end of the book, you kind of give three questions that you had been wrestling with for at least 35 years. And the last one is, how is it possible to be a faithful Christian in an American empire facilitated by a violent Christian Bible? I guess, how did you get there to that question in your own faith journey?
I suppose I started about 40 years ago working on the historical Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I was putting the historical Jesus within Judaism, within the Roman Empire. And I was probably influenced by the fact that I'm Irish. And generally speaking, when we say empire, we're thinking of the British Empire. And that doesn't quite make our day usually when we hear about that. So I probably start into this whole thing with a somewhat caustic view of empire more than Americans might have. Because many of them don't seem to realize that they have an empire, that it started as a sort of a continental empire. Native Americans would assure them that, and then grew into a hemispheric and a global empire. So part of it is that. Then the next thing I began to notice is then, why is God always against empires? I mean, all over the Bible, the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, Medes, Persians, Greeks, Romans, God's always against empires. Is it simply that they're pagan? You know, a Jewish empire would be fine in the Old Testament, or a Christian empire would be fine in the New Testament. So that pushed me to the question, which is really the basic question of the book, whether God is violent. And clearly, if you read the Christian Bible and look at the last book in there, Book of the Apocalypse, Book of Revelation, God's final solution to the problem of evil is to kill the evildoers, which is basically the way we solve the things too. Where we handle the axis of evil, we kill the axles. So really the question is not just what you're going to do about an American empire. It's a somewhat deeper question than I think actually any of the presidential candidates who are all talking about their Christianity seem to face. God is violent, and the Christian God is violent, and Christ is coming back violently for Armageddon, then it's hard really to say there's anything wrong with America getting with the program and being, of course, in the best interests of God, running a violent empire. So really, it got there step by step.
Mm-hmm. In the book, one of the things I really appreciated is that you don't try to make the entire Scripture speak, with one voice about God and violence, but you talk about competing images of God in it, and I think at the end of, well, I guess the third chapter, about God and the ambiguity of power. You said, my proposal is that the Christian Bible presents the radicality of a just and nonviolent God, repeatedly and relentlessly confronting the normalcy of an unjust and violent civilization. The Christian Bible forces us to witness the struggle of these two transcendental visions within its own pages and ask ourselves as Christians how we decide between them. My answer is that we are bound to whichever of these visions was incarnated by and in the historical Jesus, and is not the violent but the nonviolent God who is revealed to the Christian faith in Jesus of Nazareth and announced to the Christian faith by Paul of Tarsus. I was real interested in, and I think this would be something that people thinking about getting the book would be interested in, of how Jesus inherits a tradition that's mixed, and then how did he come to his own understanding of God and his understanding of his vocation?
Yeah, it's very important for me that if you look at the whole Bible, that's the Christian Bible from beginning to end, you have these two streams. Because we used to say in the past, well, all the violence is in the Old Testament, and all the non-violence is in the New Testament. And of course, that'll work as long as you don't read the Bible. But if you read the book of Apocalypse, you know that's not true. So these two streams go right through from beginning to end. The stream of the violent God, if you will, and the non-violent God. And then I realized that, well, we Christians have always said that the center, we even time everything down to Jesus and away from Jesus, before and after Christ. We always say Jesus is the center. So if this is a story, it's a story whose meaning is in the middle. And that's unusual. Usually the meaning is at the end of the story, or it's a story whose center is the climax. And the center is, well, okay, got these two gods, if you will, or two visions of God competing. Which do you see in Jesus? This is the Jesus who rode into Jerusalem on a little donkey. Not exactly a warlike vision, and probably a lampoon of Pilate coming in on the other side from the west on his horse. So this Jesus is clearly nonviolent, clearly resisting Rome nonviolently. So my answer as a Christian is, well, which of them is incarnate in Jesus? And then I think what happens is Christians are so unhappy with the first coming of Jesus that they have to invent a second coming in which he'll come back just like us. And we'd be very happy he'll come back violently, so that justifies us. And in fact, in the last century, books like C.S. Lewis's The Narnia series and the Left Behind series all say, more than the apocalypse, that we will participate. Some Christians will participate with the final slaughter of Armageddon, and that goes way beyond the apocalypse. So my answer is, which do you find in Christ?
What when Jesus was in Torah school, what do you think stuck out to him the most?
Well, I understand Jesus and 98% of people in the Jewish homeland to be non-literate. That doesn't mean they were dumb. That means that literacy was not needed for what they were doing. And Jesus would have heard about the Torah mostly from teachers, not in a formal school of any type like you and I would understand, but as the stories. And the stories of the Bible would be the one. For example, let's say you heard the story of David and Goliath. It's hard not to tell that story. Well, as soon as you start thinking of that story, you start wondering, who's Goliath around here now? Who's the biggest, nastiest thing around? Kind of the answer is the Roman Empire, I guess. Well, who's David? So the stories themselves, the stories of the Exodus, for example, I mean, if he was actually reading the book of Exodus and able to read it, he could get lost maybe in the intricacies. If you hear the story, it's going to come up very clearly. God is on the side of a small, battered people and against a great empire. So, in one sense, non-literate people, like the peasants in Latin America with liberation theology, get it. And sometimes we scholars don't get it. We're so busy arguing about something irrelevant that we miss the major relevance. So I think that's how he got it.
In the book, you talked about one of the popular visions, I guess, in the first century being the great divine cleanup. and it being related to John. And I wonder if you could describe that and then tell us how Jesus then separates his vision from John.
Okay, the classical word that we scholars use is eschatological. And eschaton's an ordinary Greek adjective that means the end. Like you could say the end of a movie, or the last person in line in the queue is the eschaton. It's the end. But now the big question is, end of what? So we've often said it's the end of the world. We're all going, world's going to be destroyed, we're going off to heaven. I think nobody in the first century would have thought of that. That would mean that God would be destroying creation, which would be embarrassing for us, of course, too, but it'd be embarrassing for God, because that would mean he messed up, he made a mistake, he shouldn't have done it. He's recalling, as it were, the car to the factory. So it's the end of evil, the end of injustice in a transformed, transfigured world. So I've translated eschatology with capital letters as the great divine cleanup of the world. Jesus called it the kingdom of God on earth, or the will of God done on earth, as we say in the Our Father. So it's the big question in the first century then was, okay, God's going to clean up the mess of the world. That seems only fair. God's just. God's in charge of the world, we believe, as people of Israel. So God's going to clean up the mess. When? So apocalyptic eschatology means, apocalypsis is a revelation. It means I'm claiming to have a revelation, a message, news from God about the great divine cleanup. And of course, the only one everyone wanted to know was when. Is it going to happen in our lifetime? I don't care if it's 1,000 years from now. They would have said, will it happen in our lifetime? John's answer is yes, it's going to happen in our lifetime. And then John told them how they could prepare for it. What Jesus said represented, if I can borrow a word from Thomas Kuhn's 1962 book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, a paradigm shift, like a mutational swerve, which happens in all sorts of traditions. It happens in politics, it happens in religion, it happens in art, literature, anything you can imagine, science. Every now and then, the standard paradigm that we all work from kind of lazily, our understanding, our model of the world, so we don't have to invent the wheel every morning, as it were. And then we start finding things that don't fit. This doesn't work. And eventually we get a paradigm shift. You have to get a new model. It's like Einstein instead of Newton. So what Jesus says is, and I think you may have learned this from what happened to John the Baptist, because John said that God was coming, and what came was Antipas's cavalry, and John died, and God did nothing. And I think Jesus decided that's not the way it's going to be. So his claim is not that the great divine cleanup is coming soon, but the great divine up has already started, and we are called to participate in it, we being Jesus' companions and hearers. And I suppose they would have said to him, Jesus, excuse me, question here. Do you mean to say that we've been waiting for God and God's been waiting for us? Jesus was, yeah. So that's why nothing is happening. Yeah. Do you mean then God's not going to do it all by God's own self? Yeah. God's not going to do it that way. So if we don't cooperate, participate, it's not going to happen, Jesus. And Jesus would have said, yeah. So the ethics that Jesus is demanding from people, the radical ethics that Jesus is demanding people, is in cooperation with God, how God's going to affect this great divine cleanup of the world. And that's a sort of a move, a mutational swerve, a paradigm shift within standard Jewish apocalyptic eschatology in the first century. That doesn't make it Christian or anything. That makes it a Jewish option within Jewish possibilities.
Do you, when we start talking about a kind of nonviolent image of God, at least in, I guess, popular religious culture in America, the thing that flies up real quick is the cross, and I guess our understanding of atonement with the cross, and even in the Narnia series, you get an understanding of atonement that then gets overplaced in the last battle at the end of the series. And I'm wondering if you can tell how you deal with atonement in the book. And I love the fireman image.
Yeah, the problem is this: it's really almost classic Christianity in the last 1,000 years, not the first 1,000 years, that substitutionary atonement, meaning that human beings have sinned against God. The only appropriate atoning sacrifice is a divine being like Jesus. So in a movie like Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, Jesus dies with unbelievable suffering to atone for the sins of all creation. That's substitutionary atonement. And it comes basically from Anselm around the year, around Numbers 1100. That's not the way sacrifice is understood either in cross-cultural anthropology or in Jewish history or in the Christian New Testament. So I want to separate very carefully substitutionary atonement from sacrifice. Mm-hmm. Sacrifice comes from two Latin words, to make sacred, sacrum facere, to make sacred. And the theory behind it is this: if you and I have, say, want to keep good relations, or if you and I have had a row and I want to restore good relations, in basic human understanding since the dawn of creation, there's two ways of doing it: the gift and the meal. I can give you a gift. Of course, I expect you to reciprocate and say thank you very much, and that we'll be friends, or I can invite you to a meal. Those are the two basic things. So if I'm in this situation with God, I'd like to maintain good relations or restore them if there's a problem. Same two possibilities, meal or the gift. Now, always in a gift to God, you want reciprocity. So it's not about substitution, but it is about reciprocity. We're not talking now about Christianity or Judaism. Across all the cultures that have blood sacrifice, the idea would be that I'm, for example, take this one, if I'm going to invite you to a festal meal, I have to kill an animal. That's their experience. It doesn't come saran wrapped as it does for us in the store. I have to go out and kill the fatted calf, and that means blood. That's showing everyone that we're going to have a good meal. So I want to have a meal with my God. I take my animal to wherever God is dwelling, and Jewish thought to be the temple. The blood is placed on the altar. It's given to God. What I've done is make that animal sacred. I've sacrum facerated in that, and I've sacrificed it. And God gives it back to me then, so I can eat with my God. It's like, I could say, the sacred mutton, as it were. I have sacrificed it. Now, it has nothing to do with substitution. Nobody is thinking, I should really be put to death, but let's take it out on the poor sheep. That's not the way they're thinking. Nor are they thinking at all, of course, of we will really make the sheep suffer. What they're saying is, I will give this sheep to God. I will make it sacred. It'll come back to me, and I'll eat with my God. And that'll establish good relations. And if I've offended God, that will atone. And now we're back friends again. So we have to separate absolutely sacrifice from either substitution or even from insisting on suffering like Mel Gibson does in his movie. Because in ordinary everyday matters, if you heard, for example, that a soldier threw herself on a grenade in a Humvee that was tossed into a Humvee in Iraq, you wouldn't simply say soldier dies. You would probably say soldier sacrifices her life because she has made it peculiarly and especially sacred by giving it up for others. Now, there's no substitution. You're not saying, well, God wants somebody dead, so whoever. What you're really saying, it's not about suffering. You're saying this person has made their death profoundly sacred by giving it up for others. That's the meaning of sacrifice. So Jesus dies for the integrity of his life. It's not that Pilate is having a bad hair day or something. It is that Jesus lives a certain type of life. Pilate gets the message. He knows exactly what Jesus is doing. He does something exactly right, by the way, from his point of view. He doesn't round up all Jesus' followers as if they were a gang of bandits. That would have been wrong. He knows Jesus is nonviolent. So he does what the Romans do with nonviolent leaders of nonviolent resistance. You pick off the leader. Barabbas, for example, he's going to round up all his followers because he's a violent revolution. So the most important witness to the meaning of Jesus' death in the New Testament is Pilate. He makes a public demonstration of what Jesus is doing, but he doesn't round up his followers. So Jesus dies, I would say, because of our sin. He dies because anyone who opposes empire in most of human history has died.
How do we as Christians, if we start wrestling with these ideas today, what role then can we see the teachings of Jesus, the life and ministry of Jesus, and his death on the cross impacting our lives?
Well, probably the best way is to see what Paul does. Paul insists that by baptism we pass through crucifixion into resurrection. Now, he's certainly not talking about everyone getting killed. That would be a very short history of Christianity. And he's not telling everyone they should go out and get themselves killed. Not at all. Because again, it would be a very short history. He is saying that the transformation, the standing over against the normalcy of violent civilization that Jesus did when Rome crucified him and God raised him, therefore abrogating Rome's judgment, that's something we all must go through. That we must decide which side are we on. That there's, but my language now, the radicality of God and the normalcy of civilization, which has always been imperial, always been unjust. It's only that if you're inside an empire, you are not being unjust, of course. You're doing all of this in the best interests of the colonies. You're just taking them out of barbarism. As the English said of the Irish, they're just savages, so they have to come over to sort of civilize them a bit. But basically, the world has been for the last 6,000 years imperial. It's only a matter of who's got it and who wants it and who's next and who's lost it. An empire is always unjust because it uses other people in your own best interest. Not that you do nothing for them. Not possible to do that. But you're doing it primarily in your own best interest, not in the best interest of the people. And usually when the empire collapses, as they all do, the homeland very often does quite well, like Austria today, or Germany today, or England today, Turkey today. Not so sure about Russia yet, but the homeland tends to do well. It's the periphery where horror takes over. It's those lines that the British Empire drew on maps, those fault lines where we have so much trouble today in Iraq or Northern Ireland or Cyprus or somewhere else. So empires basically are based, as I see it, on the injustice of violence. By that, I do not mean that they're out there beating up and killing people all the time. But if you resist them in any way, you will understand the violence. That's what happened to Jesus.
What do you think the biggest challenges facing, at least the church in America? Because the subtitle of the book was it Jesus
Against Rome then and now.
Then and now.
Now, yes.
And I mean, there are some differences between Rome and our empire in that we're running an election, and in 2 weeks there's going to be on May 6th a whole bunch of people come out to nominate someone for running for Caesar.
Yeah.
So in the in the expanse over time, how do you see these teachings and wrestling with empire and our use of power impacting a person who now actually has a vote and gives to candidates and is involved in local elections and things like that?
That's why we get no sympathy at all from Jesus or Paul if they're around today. So we took on the Roman Empire. You guys can't even handle the vote. We get no sympathy at all from them. Because very often in America, we've really abdicated our responsibility. Even this year, I think, when I'm not certain of the statistics, but I hear about 50% coming out for an election, and that's a peak.
Groundbreaking.
That's groundbreaking. 50%. That means 50% of the people in this country are seriously irresponsible. Now, I can understand if two candidates are saying almost the same thing, you can't see much difference, and you might say, I don't care either, so I won't. But I don't find anything less than 70%, 75 to 80% adequate for the situation, no matter which side you're on. So, with regard to the country, what I would like to see our country do, to start there, is to start living out some of the things it says. We have children say every morning, liberty and justice for all. Okay? That's pretty much what Paul said. Liberty and justice for all. Or all are created equal. All are endowed with their Creator, okay? Why don't you make a foreign policy based on that? You really believe the all. If you don't, then get out of the hypocrisy and say, we really believe we're built in God's image here in America. The heck with everyone else. So I'd like to see us get into the United Nations and start leading. We are the most powerful nation on earth. That's our responsibility. With regard to the church, the question I would ask them is, what do you think your purpose is? What are you organizing for? What are you organized religion for? if you ask Paul and Jesus, why are you organizing? Are you running around Galilee? Why are you running around the whole Mediterranean? I think they would say, duh. The Roman Empire is organized. How do you think we can in any way replace it with God's world without organization? But their organization was very focused. They knew what they were after. Paul would never say, well, I'm organizing so I have a job. Or I'm organizing so I can get my letters written.
Or health insurance.
Yeah, I want to get into the New Testament. I heard people are making a New Testament. I'd like to get in there. No, he was very clear what his function was. That the powers of this world have taken over God's creation. Paul would call it, and Jesus would call it, this world. I hyphenate that. This world. This hyphen world. Not God's creation we're talking about. It's the veneer of civilization with its dark undertones that we lay over creation. So that Jesus can say that God so loved the world, or he could say that my kingdom is not of this world, in it, but not of it. So it's the tension for me between the radicality of God, again and again in the Bible, and the normalcy of our civilization.
How do you think? I read on the internet that you I guess floated the idea of a third Vatican. Is it? And the quotes I saw were really interesting. So I'm just wondering if that's one of the ways you see, at least the Catholic Church as an institution, responding to this, and maybe taking the lead for the rest of us Protestants.
I said that some years ago. I said it tongue-in-cheek, because what I said actually was that I thought we needed a third Vatican Council in which the bishops could have returned the gift of infallibility and get the gift of accuracy. So it was tongue-in-cheek, but it was also serious. In this, that I meant that the Church cannot speak externally to the world without looking internally to itself. I quoted Look Homeward, Angel, Thomas Wolfe's book. You have to look at yourself first. Even when the Church quite rightly makes criticisms, as the Pope did in his talk to the bishops, about over-consumerism or something like that. Structurally, he has to look at the Church. It's not enough to simply say, well, we've got rid of any, pedophilia in the Church. You have to figure out, why did that happen? Why was it allowed to happen? Why was there so much cover-up about it? And did it reveal a structural flaw? Because when an institution has a crisis like this, like in the banks right now, you don't just ask yourself about individuals. You see, well, is there a huge structural, systemic flaw that allowed this to happen and then grow and grow and grow? Is there, to quote a famous phrase, is there a cancer at the heart of the papacy, as there once was at the heart of the presidency, Simon Nixon? So I think there is. I really think there's a cancer at the heart of the papacy, which is an abuse of power, which shows itself up, the terrible tip of the iceberg, as it were, in pedophilia. But I find it also an abuse of power to say that women cannot be priests. I cannot find any justification for that, beyond habit. But it's a tradition, but then so was slavery. For centuries, slavery was a tradition, and we had to decide, well, it isn't right. So the fact that something is a tradition, even a very long tradition, is not justification for or against it. It could be a good tradition, it could be a bad tradition. Tradition simply says we've been doing it this way. It could be a bad tradition, and I think it's a serious abuse of power to withhold from women who feel the call of God to the priesthood, to refuse them the priesthood. It is, quite frankly, a sin against divinity, or a sin against the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. It's not just bad, bad tradition or something like that. It's terribly serious. It's much more serious than saying only celibates.
Since you and Marcus have been doing a lot of writing and speaking with lay audiences, what's been the most exciting things that you've been seeing in the church, or the best conversations you've been getting in? Things that make you think, we might be turning a corner, or places of new life in the church?
Marcus and I were very close friends, talk about this an awful lot. And that's really why we wrote those books. And we're finishing, well, no, we're kind of in the middle of one now on Paul, which would be the same type of intended for the church. And basically, it's not that neither of us could have written those books by ourselves. They're not so huge, but we're trying to make a statement by coming together to do this. And it's born of the fact that Marcus has been on the road even more than I am, and both of us are on the road all the time, all across this country, in most of the denominations. I don't tend to get invited to Roman Catholic ones too often, actually. But I talk to Roman Catholic people all the time in other churches who have left Roman Catholicism. So both of us are finding all across the country churches. We're not invited into the parking lot. We're invited by the church in to speak in the sanctuary, and both of us preach very often on Sundays, all over the country. And any weekend, we have usually a whole weekend. I usually Marcus to speak on Friday night, and then 3.5-hour lectures on Saturday, and Sunday maybe an adult forum, or maybe preach in 1 or 2 services. So it's a whole weekend, and that's what we do most of the time. This one, for example, is an unusual one in that I'm simply here for 3 lectures, usually the equivalent of 5. That's all over the country. That's a hugely hopeful. Mm-hmm. So I'm not just hopeful in a general sense. I see this all over the country. Now, it's kind of self-selecting. I know that. Marcus gets invited, people who've read his book. So do I. Neither of us gets invited in to see, let's see what he'll say. Oh, my Lord, what he said. People have read or they've seen the Living the Question videos, and they want to hear more. And the laity in this country, the Christian laity in this country, is getting steadily better and better educated. They're many of them on the cutting edge of where discussions are at the moment. It's not that, well, scholars will figure it out, then they'll tell the laity, it'll be a trickle down, and 100 years from now they'll know what happened 100 years back. That's not happening anymore. They know right what's going on right at the moment.
All right, I've been wondering, this is completely change of topic, but what is your favorite Jesus movie?
What's my favorite Jesus movie?
I mean, you don't have to have just one, but I always like asking New Testament scholars what their favorite Jesus movie is.
Oh, it's got to be The Life of Brian.
All right.
Oh, of course. I mean, all the others, even marvelous ones like Montreal or The Last Temptation of Christ. In one sense, the most serious thing I think you could do when you're studying early Christianity, is lose your sense of humor. You really can't afford to do that. So I think that one, it jars people into thinking if Jesus really went around spitting one-liners into the Galilean wind, as it were, nobody really got it. Did he say, blessed are the meek, or blessed are the peak, or blessed are the squeak?
The cheesemakers.
The cheesemakers, yeah. Yeah, what did he say? Yeah, blessed are the, so it's the same with Samaritan parable. It would have taken him maybe 2 minutes to tell, and if he told it the way it's in Luke, nothing wrong with Luke, it's a condensed version. But I see him doing that for an hour, miming it out. Maybe the audience, of course, not be polite and waiting. They'd be arguing back with him. They wouldn't be sitting politely for a full hour, waiting for him to finish, and then the question and answer time. They'd be shouting back at him, why are you always picking on priests? My brother's a priest, and he's a good guy. You don't like Levites. What's wrong with Levites? You like Samaritans. I don't like Samaritans. They'd be all talking back to him. That's educating your audience. So one person who says that, somebody else will oppose them. So I think they must have been, I don't know if hilarious is the word, but I can just imagine a response of somebody saying, I think this sower parable is stupid, Rabbi. We always knew about the paths and the thistles and the birds. We knew that. And then somebody else saying, it's a parable, dummy. It's not about sowing. Well, if it's not about sowing, why is it talking about sowing? It's a parable. Well, what's it about? That's what you're supposed to figure out. It's a parable. So, I could see far more hilarity in this whole thing than appears when we read it solemnly.
So after Paul, does that mean we're going to get you and Marcus to do a parables book?
If we did one, after all we've written on Jesus, what I would really like to do, and we have talked about this, it's not at all even decided between us, let alone with Harper, I would like to do a book called Parables, which would be half about the parables by Jesus. In other words, stories that he made up to speak about the kingdom of God, and then show how that continued into the New Testament with them making up stories about Jesus. So that, for example, Matthew and Luke in their first 2 chapters, when they make up a Christmas story about Jesus, have simply picked up the bad habit of making up stories from Jesus. And, of course, they carry tremendous theological freight as fiction. There's no reason why they can't. A parable is a fictional story with a theological punch. So Jesus did it, and they did it about Jesus. So I'd like really to show, in one sense, how a whole gospel is almost a parable blown up big. It's not obviously that they're not based on fact. Of course they're based on fact. Same way as the Good Samaritan is based on the fact there was a Jerusalem and a Jericho and a road and a donkey and denarii and Samaritans and priests and Levites. Put them all together, you got a fiction. So you can take all the facts about Jesus' life, the way Mark does, or Matthew does, or Luke does, or John does. And what you get basically is like watching a television program that says, based on a true story. Yeah, based on a true story. But each of them feel quite free to base it differently on a true story. In other words, a gospel is really a parable in the biggest sense. And there's many stories in between which are parables within the gospel. So to get people used to the idea that a parable is a fiction with a punch. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, you're trying to get people's imagination going. Best thing to do. Tell them a story. Tell them a good one.
So if someone was listening to this, went out, read God and Empire, liked it, what would you suggest?
You mean to say there's somebody in the whole United States that hasn't read it yet?
3.
And
I'm
all right.
Email this MP3 to them.
Okay, good. Get the 3 of them. Send it to the 3 presidential candidates. There's an idea. Yeah, I think it's very, very important. It's important for our country. It's important for our church, because the church is in the world for the world. It doesn't say God so loved the church. I'm sure God does, having a sense of humor. God so loved the world, and the role of the church is to redeem the world, make it holy, make it just, make it a place that God's not ashamed of. It's God's creation. Well, if we put out something ourselves from a factory and it really is deficient, we get so embarrassed we recall it. We don't want God to recall the world, so we have to cooperate with God in making it a just place. And the irony is that our country was founded by breaking away from an empire. And since I'm Irish, I'm all in favor of breaking away from the British Empire. America did it faster than we were able to do it in Ireland. But basically, you're breaking away from empire, and you're promising that all are created equal. All are endowed with their Creator, with inalienable rights. Not some, but all. And that we pledge allegiance to liberty and justice for all. Then just do it.
Well, I want to thank you for talking, and I hope to see you again soon. Go read the book if you haven't read it, and then go do something to change the world.
Thank you, Trip, very, very much.
Oh, it was fun.
That's another Homebrewed Christianity. Stay tuned for the continuation of the turf war with the Nick and Josh podcast. They do great work, so check them out on iTunes. Do a search, Nick and Josh podcast, or go to the nickandjoshpodcast.com and tell them that you like them, but you like homebrewed Christianity more.
And remember, they can call our phone number and say anything. But the ideal would be to tell us what weapon we're going to use in a turf war, or to do an impersonation of Nick and Josh, and the winner gets a free book. I actually got 2 books, so if we get 2 calls that are like entertaining, maybe we'll give 2 free books.
There you go.
This is John Dominic Crossan, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity.
All right.
And in Ireland, we always think that the homebrew is the best brew.
Ooh, we're going to keep that.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Homebrewed Christianity. We'll be back next week. If we're late, it's not because my computer broke this time. It's probably because we got offed by Nick and Josh.
Cheer up, man. You know what they say? Some things in life are bad. They can really make you mad. Other things just make you swear and curse. When you're chewing on life's gristle, don't grumble, give a whistle. And this'll help things turn out for the best. And always look on the bright side of life. Always look on the light side of life. If life seems jolly rotten, there's something you've forgotten, and that's to laugh and smile and dance and sing. When you're feeling in the dumps, don't be silly chumps. Just purse your lips and whistle, that's the thing. And always look on the bright side of life. Come on. Always look on the right side of life. For life is quite absurd, and death's the final word. You must always face the curtain with a bow. Forget about your scene, give the audience a grin. Enjoy it, it's your last chance anyhow. So always look on the bright side of death. Just before you draw your terminal breath. Life's a piece of shit when you look at it. Life's a laugh and death's a joke, it's true. You'll see it's all a show, keep 'em laughing as you go. Just remember that the last laugh is on you. And always look on the right side of life. Always look on the right side of life. Nothing will come from nothing, you know what I say? Cheer up, you old bugger. Come on, give us a grin. There you are. See? The end of the film. Incidentally, this record's available in the foyer. Someone's got to live as well, you know? Who do you think pays for all this rubbish? Always look on money back, you know? I told him. I said to him, Bernie, I said, they'll never make that money back.